I'm guessing this is the official start point of my journey. Although you could argue it started last night where I had a lamp test for COVID, which came back negative. But I've now been told the lamp test will not be sufficient. It is not negative enough. So I'm now at a massive Radisson, off to get a PCR test that gives results in 4 hours. And hopefully I will get that back in time for me to get on my plane. I've now made it to my gate, and that plane behind me is the plane that will take me first to Abu Dhabi and then to Sydney. It only took about, I would say, 18 or 20 staff at check-in to get me onto this plane. They had to ring Canberra to check that I had the correct visa paperwork. I had to have my passenger transport locator form in place. I also needed a visa waiver, needed to show my PCR test. Once I make it into Sydney, there's a whole other rigmarole involved where I have to try and enter the country surreptitiously because the locals are so pissed off they're not allowed to travel anywhere. They're cross with people like me who are waltzing on in to do nonsense TV. And frankly, I completely understand their outrage. So I've just arrived, landed into Sydney after an 11-hour flight from Abu Dhabi. My lovely driver's here, and we're just waiting for our police escort, I think, to be able to go off to the hotel for quarantine. So I have finally arrived at my quarantine accommodation. The sergeant in charge of the police in this area met me from the car and took me into the hotel, at which point I had both a Navy and military escort to the reception desk. And then an Army and a Navy gentleman, 2 of them, in uniform, brought me to my hotel room and brought my luggage in. I know that quarantine isn't supposed to be fun, and I'm sure I will lose my shit at some point in the next 14 days. But I have to say, being escorted to your room by the Navy and the Army is quite exciting. Anyway, 14 days quarantine for me for the crime of, coming to Australia with a negative COVID test. A final update from me now that I'm installed into my quarantine accommodation. I was told that if an alarm was to go off, I'm to stay in my room and await further instruction. Now, I know that I've promised to obey government instructions for quarantine. If there's a fire alarm, I'm not going to be staying here and waiting. I'm not frightened of COVID, and even if I was, I'd be much more frightened of being burnt alive. But the instruction that you're given when they drop you in your room without a key and tell you to stay there is, even if there was a fire alarm, you're to stay in your room and await further instruction. That's how mad the brainwashing is here in Australia.